I hope we do not forget the pain and anguish and sense of loss felt by those all over the country who have been the victims of violence at the hands of illegal aliens. H.R. 8 would not have stopped many of the circumstances I raised, but a wall, a barrier on the southern border may have, and that's what we're fighting for.
Mr. Chairman.
I hope that we'll deal with all of the drivers of violence. The greatest driver of violence in the circumstances that I indicated was not the firearm. It was the fact that we have an immigration system that allows people to come here violently. We engage in...
There will be no comments.
Is there a process in the committee whereby if the very same people are repeatedly interrupting the time of the members, that those people will be asked to depart the committee? Or is there...
I will. Excuse me. If the gentleman repeats that or any other comment, I will directly be removed.
Yeah, that was at yesterday's House Judiciary hearing on gun violence after Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida argued that illegal immigration was a bigger threat than guns. Gaetz' words prompted that outcry that you saw from Parkland father Manuel, Oliver, and Fred Gutenberg. And Manuel is with us now. His son Joaquin was killed in the Parkland shooting massacre. And Manuel and his wife Patricia are the co-founders of the gun control group Change the Ref. And we invited you on the show. I saw that happen yesterday. And I also we both were watching the video that you created in reaction to Louis C.K. and jokes about Parkland shooting victims. And we found the work that you were doing, the art that you were creating to try and bring light to the problem, to be so moving. And personally, when I was watching that hearing, I wanted to hear what you had to say. So we'd like to hear it now. What is it that you wanted to tell the congressman?
Well, number one, I really want this story to at some point get back to the name that really matters here, which is Joaquin Oliver and the other victims from Parkland and the other 40,000 victims that we lose every year because of gun violence. So I really want to go over this chapter as fast as I can so I can get back to what I was doing before yesterday. I had no idea who this person was before yesterday. And he's a salesperson from the Republican Party that it becomes part of the commission. And the reason why I call him a salesperson is because he's selling a project that has no relationship at all with what the discussion was about. This person came in here trying to solve the problem with the argument that we need a wall. We're discussing about gun violence in this room and how we're going to end with this epidemic. And a member of this commission that should be qualified to sit down and understand our concerns. Not only my personal concern as a father of a victim, but there's also a lot of young people in this room trying to stay alive. And it was very offensive that the only side of the story that seems to bother them is this wall that seems to be the solution for all our problems. What I said is, remember my son, remember us. And then he pointed at me like that. And you don't point at me like that. And then he tried to get me out of the room. And you don't do that. You don't get me out of any room. I'll get you out of that room as soon as I have the chance to vote for someone else. So it wasn't a conversation between this person and me. I wish it was like that. I got a warning, said, take it easy, sir. You better sit down and you're not allowed to say anything else. And that's fine. I just reacted as a father. I am still Joaquin's dad, and I will be Joaquin's dad till the last day that I'm here. And anybody that offends my kid will receive an answer from me.
We would like our viewers, if they get a chance sometime today, to actually go online, because Mika showed me you're murdering innocent children comedy night response to what Louis C.K. said, and it was extraordinarily moving. And as a father, it was so hard. It was so hard for me to even see your son telling the joke, playing the drums at the end. He seemed like such a lovely, wonderful kid with such just a wonderful spirit. Tell us a little bit about him. Tell us about your son.
My son was the greatest person I have ever met. He was a funny, very funny person. I remember exactly what happened that day. We were in my studio, surrounded by music and art, which was our main reason in life. Feel love and also give love. We were a very happy family before all this happened. Joaquin was having fun with that drum set, making jokes. I was with my cell phone, playing with him that comedy moment. So again, this is back to another name on Joaquin's story. This is about Joaquin Oliver, not about Louis C.K. or the guy from yesterday. I'm dealing with comedians. I'm dealing with comedians inside Capitol Hill and outside of Capitol Hill. And the reason that I did that video for the Louis C.K. thing is because I want to make sure that I'm part of this fight in the best possible way. What do I know? What are my skills? I'm in the advertising business. I'm a creative person and I'm an artist. That's who I am. I don't wear ties, I don't wear suits, I don't go to meetings with politicians. So I'll do my side of the job by communicating the right message to people, to the majority. Because we need to understand that there's a big group that is supporting what we're doing, and it's only increasing every single day. So I'll keep on fighting this in a non-traditional way. And I feel that I'm qualified for that, and I'm trying to stay strong with the help of my son, wherever he is right now, and of course my wife and my daughter, to make this happen.
Mike Barnicle.
You know, listening to you, Mr. Oliver, it strikes me, and I'm sure it strikes everyone on this panel as parents, that you belong to a club that no parent ever wants to join. You've buried your son. And so yesterday, I'm wondering, as you watched that congressman point at you and basically telling the country that a wall along the Mexican border would be more helpful than anything having to do with the elimination or the restriction of gun ownership and usage, how do you deal with something as irrational as that coming from an elected official?
Well, it's not only irrational, it's wrong, but it's also a big contradiction coming from them. What happens here, and I don't get it. I was also in the State of the Union listening to our president, and I don't understand why some deaths are more important than others, and how we are trying to solve a small portion of our victims and not the big picture. We assume that we have a perfect system that it's allowing people to defend themselves, and that's all we think about. Now here's the thing. If we really are concerned about people dying from illegal aliens that are criminals, or from Americans, or from whoever gets out there and is a bad person and kills someone, then we should worry about all of them, the big picture of it. So the contradiction is, yes, we want to save lives, but wait a minute, the wall will save 4,000. What about the other 40,000? You know who's an immigrant? I'm an immigrant. I did things by the book. My son came from Venezuela. I was trying to find a safer life in here. He got shot by an American white dude. So what's the answer for that? If I don't get it from them, they will get it from me. That's my point.
Mr. Oliver, it's Willie Geist. Thank you for sharing these thoughts about your son. By all accounts, was just a remarkable young man and lost his life at 17 years old. As you said, you moved here 15 years ago with your family from Venezuela. You all became citizens of this country. You chose Parkland because it was a safe place with good schools, or so you thought until last February. I'm wondering, though, what you believe as a practical matter ought to be done about guns in this country. You've unfortunately had to become well-versed over the last year in the gun debate in America. What do you think is realistic that can change in this country with regard to guns?
Well, number one, I've been in other countries. All these years, I've been exchanging, educating myself into what other nations have done, and they just didn't deal with it as soon as they knew it was a dangerous position. We need to make sure that we pass some common sense bills, like the universal background checks is a no-brainer, and I don't even know why we're discussing this. By the way, I saved a lot of time yesterday by making my point, because now we're not going to waste more time talking about the wall, hopefully. And each minute that we save from these discussions is probably a life that we're saving. So this is taking too long. This is taking too long, and the answers are right there on the table. You can see it in Australia, you can see it in the United Kingdom, you can see it in Japan. These are nations that were able to solve this. These are nations that were able to put their civilians and people before guns or the right to arm yourself. So we need to put some control in here. And yes, some people don't like the word gun control. Well, guess what? I do. And some people don't like to talk about guns because it's not the right time. Well, guess what? It is my right time to talk about guns. So there is a solution as long as we keep our minds centered in the problem. My son is not here. What I'm doing is not going to save him. Anyone that has a kid out there should be worried and concerned about what happened to Patricia and Manuel, and most important, what happened to Joaquin. So you should be part of the solution and push forward to make this thing happen. This is an American tradition. It's okay. It's okay as long as the gun lobby and the NRA are behind this death. It's fine. Guess what? It's not okay.
All right. Thank you so much, Manuel Oliver. We greatly appreciate it. It is important to note here that actually 9 out of 10 Americans since Newtown have supported an expansion of background checks, universal background checks. An overwhelming majority of Americans support the banning of bump stocks, which Congress has refused to do since Las Vegas, since people were gunned down at a country music concert. It's important to note that in many polls, a majority of Americans support the banning of military-style assault-type weapons. The numbers actually, people may not like hearing it in Congress, but actually the overwhelming majority of Americans actually do support common sense gun safety laws.
We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.